Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's webinar entitled South Africa and Mauritius Education Sectors Today, International Education Market Updates, Trends, and Developments. My name is Luke Bruce, and I am the Specialist for Virtual Marketing and International Initiatives at the BC Council for International Education, and I will be today's moderator. BCCIE is a provincial agency under the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Training, advancing the interests of international education throughout the entire IE sector, including K-12, higher education, and the language sector. Thank you for joining us today on what promises to be an important presentation from one of BC's international education partners of South Africa, representing Mauritius. Today's webinar is co-hosted by BCCIE and Trade Commissioner Service, Global Affairs Canada. Before we get started, and prior to introducing our presenters, it is important that I acknowledge that at BCCIE, we live and work on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Now on to a few housekeeping items. Attendees will be muted during the webinar. If you'd like to submit a question to our panelists during the broadcast, please submit during the Q&A function in the control panel. You can also upvote any submitted questions to show support and importance for those questions. We'll try to get to these at the end of our discussion. If you require technical assistance during the webinar, please also use the chat box and we will help answer your inquiry. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce the presenter for this morning, Keith Banerjee, Trade Commissioner, the High Commission of Canada in Johannesburg, South Africa. Allow me to turn the floor over to Keith. Oh. Sorry, Keith, we can't hear you.
That has happened before. Good. Well, good morning, everyone, and good evening from my office in Johannesburg. I think I might have seen on the list of attendees some people I know, so I feel like I'm amongst friends. I'll get to my presentation in just a second, but I like to cut to the chase when I deliver these. I'm going to be delivering a presentation on South Africa. I have a slide deck that has lots of information and interesting statistics for you. In South Africa, Canada punches well below its weight. It's the first market in the world where I've seen that Canada's not in the top 5 in terms of international attention in recruiting in education. So we're working hard to try to correct that. And one of the reasons why I've agreed to deliver this presentation is to drum up more interest from Canada in getting the word out for as Canada is a superpower in education. We've developed a push and pull strategy where we are pushing onto the market the idea of Canada as an international education destination. And we are also pulling from the market through institutional linkages. And I'm going to be asking for all of those in attendance to try to help me in both of those regards. So in the push strategy, more attention from Canadian schools, things like webinars and whatnot, which we can help you to facilitate in front of high schools in particular, will help us in our efforts to draw. What we're focusing on is in international undergraduate university recruitment. I think that's the lowest hanging fruit that we can see. And then for those, especially research universities in Canada that want to be connected to some very fine universities in South Africa, we're also very keen to help initiate that institution to institution link. And then for Mauritius, unfortunately, I don't have a presentation to share with you. So I'll just speak to some of the trends that are happening in Mauritius. We are punching way above our weight on this small island of 1.5 million people, where Canada is very highly regarded as an international education destination. So we're just trying to support and build on that momentum. I think a lot of those in attendance have actually been to the island to see firsthand that we're essentially in a neck and neck race with Australia for attention. And without further ado, I'll get to the presentation now. So I'm going to share my screen, and I think that's it there. There we are. Okay. There we are. So this is just a brief summary of the education market in South Africa. First, I should, Luke, can I just confirm that my screen is being shared?
You're good.
Good. Okay. So South Africa is a country of contrasts. It's probably the most unequal country in the world, where the quite significant wealth that exists in this country is very unequally shared. So South Africa, of course, is a G20 country with a lot of mineral wealth. And yet, you'll see in the middle of the statistics on the left there, the 0.01% of the population, or 3,500 people, controls 15% of that wealth of the country. So unfortunately, the very rich are just that. They're very rich, and they really have for their kids their choice in the world of where to go. And traditionally, that has meant that South Africa has been sending students to the absolute best educational institutions in the world, and they're not very price sensitive when it comes to their choices. So they can afford to send their kids to Yale or Harvard because they can buy a building for their kids to study there. And then the middle class, which is typically the sweet spot of where Canada has an edge, tends not to be all that strong here in South Africa. Now while that's growing, it tends to be where we're falling down. So I'll get to that in a minute. On the right hand of the slide there, some of the developments that are happening in the local market, the most significant is what was called the fees must fall movement from about 5 years back now, where universities were trying to raise tuition fees probably too quickly. And there was a violent protest reaction that led to a significant amount of damage. And the government's response has been that they have agreed to make education free. They've begun on that path. So now, just as of last year, education is free. I think it's written there for under incomes of household incomes of under $35,000. The plan to roll that out has been entirely fraught with difficulties. The government in South Africa has very little money to be providing that, and it's led to the erosion of the quality of education and spurred more and more interest from the South African market to study abroad. So those that can afford to go abroad, whereas they might not have been looking outside the country before this event, now they absolutely are. And international education is becoming more and more appealing. That said, the last point there on the right-hand side of the TVET. So unemployment in South Africa is wildly high. It's approaching 30% officially. Unofficially, it's over 50%, especially among youth. And there's an enormous demand for capacity building and trades training. The difficulty is that in keeping with that economic demographics, there's just no money to pay for it. And those who would be willing to pay in other markets where we would find a middle class just doesn't exist in South Africa. So unfortunately, even though there's a significant amount of demand, there just isn't the buyer. For those of you who are representing colleges in Canada, that if you can come to me with some sort of a plan that has private sector participation, so a training program that's paid for by a third party, typically a company, it would go over extremely well here in this market. Some of the trends, if I can, there we are, some of the trends in the market. So the market here in South Africa is actually quite big. It's a country of 60 million people. There's 26 publicly funded universities that are all quite good. I read recently that the 5 research-intensive universities in South Africa produce 50% of Africa's research. And a lot of our Canadian universities are already plugged into that. There's plenty of appetite for more. So those of you who want to find partners in South Africa, I'm already connected with about half of them, and I'm eager to meet as many of the 26 as I can to find good partnerships for you. And then some stats on who in South Africa is going abroad. So it's just under 10,000. The trend is going up. That's 10,000 students leaving South Africa for an education, and it's largely matched on the number of students coming into Canada from South Africa. So you can see both trend lines there. They're both on the increase, and that's great. We think that there's plenty of room for way more. So you can see that the U.S., the UK, Australia have the lion's share of the receiving those students. Canada's behind Germany for whatever reason in terms of attracting international students. So I'm trying to reverse that trend and get Canada into the top 5. Some opportunities for Canada. I mentioned that our sweet spot, the lowest hanging fruit, we think, is in university undergraduate recruitment. The K-12 space has seen a little bit of uptake. I just got an email from the Canadian Accredited Independent Schools, CAIs, letting me know that they've seen an uptake and they'd like to run a virtual mission this coming year, which is great news. So if we can grow that space, great. Colleges as well, I've mentioned, there is demand. It's just a matter of finding the money. And then in virtual learning, this is actually a space that was growing before the pandemic hit. So before there was any type of health crisis to drive online education, we were beginning to see interest from Canadian tech companies from like smart boards and D2L. They were approaching us to see if they can deploy in South Africa. And then when the pandemic hit, believe it or not, it actually reduced interest in this region because lower hanging fruit all of a sudden became more and more available in Asia and Europe, North America, where they had money to be found in places that weren't so risky. We are expecting that once the pandemic subsides and that source of funds becomes more reliable, they will have another appetite for us. So this is another area that we continue to explore. Right. So there we are. We think that in terms of opportunities, Canada should be a very good fit for South Africa. When South Africans are looking for what they want in international education, everything that Canada has to offer is what they're looking for. It's a secure space. We have a very good quality in our education. Value for money is part of my elevator pitch, and especially in the context of what's going on in the U.S. and the U.K. as the U.S. Pardon me, as the UK is completing Brexit, that's seen here in South Africa as, a very traditional partner that's kind of breaking away from international engagement. And then, to be very frank, the George Floyd protests in the US here in South Africa really had an effect on the psyche to see a number of Black people in a lot of places in the United States come under violent reactions. So the idea of Black families in South Africa sending their children to a place where there is such race violence is no longer an option. I actually have the American School of Johannesburg here, which has about 1,300 students, coming to me to ask me to deliver presentations on the Canadian education system because their American families are looking for alternatives outside of America. And of course, Canada is the safest next best alternative. And there we go. Okay, so strategies for market entry. We do work with education agents in South Africa. They're not as excellent an avenue to engagement with the South African students as we might think. There are only 2 that are very good here in South Africa, and then about 5 others that are just questionable. So we are happy to introduce you to the 2 that we work with reliably. If you would like representation here in South Africa. They hold some events as well, so that might be a way for you to become known here in the market. There's other events, ISEF, which runs events all over the world. They run an event in Cape Town, usually in May. That's where, if you were to come, you would be able to meet with agents from across the continent. I think their May event is going to be virtual for this year, but in years later, we'd be very happy to welcome you to Cape Town, which is just an enormously beautiful city. I mentioned our push and pull strategy. So working with the agents, and we work directly with high schools. That's part of our push strategy. And then the pull comes in through the institutional linkages. And we have good ones. So the University of Limpopo works with Laurentian. Laurentian actually helped them build a Department of Geology. We're using money from Ivanhoe Mines. Stellenbosch Business School is working with Queen's. UCT, which is Africa's foremost university in Cape Town, is already very well connected with Canadian universities, so we basically track that. And then very recently, actually, York University created a cooperation with WITS, the University of Witwatersrand, here in Johannesburg, on artificial intelligence in tracking health crises, and they're applying it immediately to the pandemic. And that came with almost $1.5 million from IDRC funding, so that's great. And for any of these market entry strategies, of course, me and my team, we're here in Johannesburg to help you. On that note, so we do have a couple of things happening that are coming up. As a matter of fact, next week, I'm planning to send out a newsletter to you, to my Canadian client schools, letting you know about some things that are going on. We're trying to build an alumni network here for South African students who have gone to Canada and come back, so that they have a place to discuss their experiences, find jobs, deliver jobs. We're also going to be working with the local visa and immigration officers here in Pretoria to put together a webinar for students who are in the process of applying. So on both of those trajectories, I'm hoping to reach out to you so that you can link me either to your alumni office for the one initiative, and to your list of students who are in the process of applying. And I'll leave it up to you how you want to manage that. If you want to just put me in touch with the alumni office, if you want to get in touch with your own alumni, if you want to share with me their email addresses, up to you, and same with the prospective students on that side. And then in pursuit of all of that, we're also organizing a session on March 17th for high school counselors here in South Africa that we've expanded to a couple other markets to include Mauritius as well. In our effort in our push side of the strategy, where we're trying to nurture relationships with high school counselors. Now, I also promised that I would speak to Mauritius. I'll just leave this slide up on the screen so that those of you who want to write down my email address can get the spelling correct. In Mauritius, so it's quite the opposite as South Africa. So this is a small market. It's 1.3 million people. About the same number of students go abroad. So in South Africa, it was just over 9,000. In Mauritius, it's just under 8,000 students that leave Mauritius every year to go and pursue an international education. From that number, we have this year we probably have closer to 1,000, if not over. So about double the number of students that go abroad from South Africa. Sorry, about double the number of students leaving South Africa to go to Canada, leave Mauritius to go to Canada. So we're attracting twice as many students from Mauritius as we are from South Africa, which astounds me. It continues to astound me every time I see these statistics. What's more astounding is that the number is exploding. Canada, as I mentioned, we're neck and neck with Australia in terms of attraction. That's, mind you, discounting a couple of very historical relationships. So Mauritius being a bilingual English and French jurisdiction, they do send more students to France, and because of historical ties, they also send students to India and China. But in terms of our competitors, yeah, we're very much neck and neck with Australia, way ahead of the States, way ahead of the UK. And that's a trend that I love. Every year, two very prominent agencies hold fairs twice a year, usually in February and November. And the 2 or 3 times that I've gone to the island to welcome the Canadians that come, it's a community of 30 Canadian schools that all know each other so well. And it's always a pleasure to be in this community of 36 Canadian recruiters that are all just what is that? Catching fish out of a barrel type of analogy. So my effort is it's a very easy job. I'm selling something that people want to buy. And so for those of you who also are looking at the low-hanging fruit, Mauritius is something you should be considering. It's also a very strong middle-class market. So the colleges are finding significant amount of success. There's actually an agency that I've been working with there for about 1.5 years now who is focusing on colleges and is an alumnus of Sheridan. So he knows the Canadian college system very well and is very eager to add more colleges to his repertoire. And I have begun pursuing some institutional linkages there. There's only about 4 universities and colleges that in Mauritius that are available. I have links into 2. So if you're interested in forming a more formal relationship with one of the institutions in Mauritius, I'm happy to help with that as well. And on that note, I encourage you to get in touch with me. My whole, actually, I'll stop sharing now, and that might bring back my sincerity in my face when I tell you that my whole reason for being here is to help you. So if you have any ambitions of working in either South Africa or Mauritius, please feel free to reach out. If you just want to get more information, please send me an email. We have an ongoing distribution list of any Canadian institution that has shown any interest in these markets ever. And that's who I send that newsletter to. So I'm happy to include you in what should be next week's edition. If you're keen on joining that alumni project, if you know of students that have come from particularly South Africa and have returned and you'd like to get them linked into a Canadian community here, I'm happy to link you into our Canada South Africa Chamber of Commerce, which is leading on that alumni initiative. And then if you have any students that are in your pipeline that are about to prepare their visa application, I'm very happy to put them in touch with our visa application officers here in the office in Pretoria for them to be able to guide your applicants on how best to prepare their study permit application. And that's it. That's all for me. I'm looking forward to your questions.
All right, thank you so much, Keith. Now we're going to open up the webinar to some questions from our attendees. So great. We had a few submitted in advance of the presentation, and then we'll also have a few coming in here. Sorry about that. All right. So Keith, one of the questions was, you mentioned opportunities in the K-12 section are growing in South Africa. Can you speak to any market entry strategies, specifically to engage families sending their elementary or secondary students abroad?
Yeah, so this is it's a segment of the market that we're only discovering is growing. So frankly, we haven't done much work in that area. As we nurture our contacts with the high school counselors here, this is one of the elements that we're going to be approaching them with. I have received some interest from Canadian K-12 schools, especially for more senior high school exchanges. And we're trying to develop a strategy as to how our schools can better connect into those opportunities. I'm happy to follow up with any institution in Canada that is looking for more information on that as we come to know it.
Thank you. The next question, can you speak to the interest in students from South Africa and Mauritius to study and then immigrate to Canada with work completion?
Yeah, okay. So this is controversial. In all of my EduCanada presentations, we celebrate the idea that after graduation, typically from a 4-year program, students from both markets can live and work, pardon me, by applying for another visa, the postgraduate work permit. It's got a longer title than that, for up to 3 years, getting experience in the thing they just got trained to do. And then all of that time, the study experience, the work experience counts towards immigration. So this is part of our rhetoric. And it's very popular, both in Mauritius and in South Africa. In Mauritius, it's fairly balanced, I would say. There's lots of Mauritians that come back, and this is to our benefit, well, my benefit, I should say, because this is one of the reasons why Canada is punching way above its weight, because enough people have come back to Mauritius that they want to convince their nephews and nieces to go and play in the snow in Canada, and they talk about their wonderful experiences there. And it's through this word of mouth from people who've returned to Mauritius. In South Africa, I haven't seen that so much. Studies are seen as an emigration vehicle, absolutely, and there is a lot of pressure in the local market in South Africa to leave. The economic conditions here being so disparate, if you're not already in the wealth, then it's going to be it's getting harder and harder to break in. So one of the solutions that people look for is avenues outside the country to plant new roots, and studies abroad, studies in Canada is definitely an avenue towards that.
Okay, thanks. Keith, I wonder if you could advise on any common reasons for study permit denials. It seems that the refusal rates are still pretty high.
So, that I was thinking that there might be a question on study permits. Yeah, the refusal rates. I mean, I'm not the immigration agent, and I really can't speak to the rationale for why study permits are refused. My understanding from the colleagues that I work with, and I do work with them pretty closely, is that the acceptance rates from Mauritius are very high. So applications from students from Mauritius tend to be very strong, and it speaks to families that have been preparing really their whole lives to send their students not just abroad but to Canada. Which makes their forget the name of it. There's a personal statement that the students are invited to submit. It makes that statement resound really well with the application assessor. From South Africa, my understanding is the refusal rate isn't so bad. There's still a lot of people that are just looking for any way out. So they'll apply to a study permit in Canada, just as they'll apply anywhere they can. And it's those applications where the assessor can usually see that this is not a legitimate application, or where they've shared information with our like-minded countries and seen that they've been refused by the UK or by the US or another information sharing system that they have, and that tends to work against them, obviously. That said, the rates that we have in terms of refusal are not nearly as high as they would be in a lot of other places on the continent. I've heard that the refusal rate from Nigeria is as high as 90%. Now, when you're talking about 200,000 applications a year, that's still a lot of people coming into Canada, but so that we don't have those same volumes in number. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Next question, are there any upcoming fairs online in South Africa or Mauritius that you can recommend?
Yes, there are. I don't have the dates in front of me, so I do know I do know that there is an OVEC fair, which I think is coming up in March. There's a Campus Abroad fair. Those are both in Mauritius. Campus Abroad, I think, is going to be in June or July. Yeah, I just got a message about that today. And we're going to be at both of those virtually. I don't know if any of the South African agencies are planning any fairs coming up. And you're reminding me actually that information on both of those fairs should be in my newsletter that comes out next week. Write me an email.
Excellent. So Keith, you mentioned sort of the strength of South Africa in undergrad opportunities, recruitment opportunities. Can you speak to sort of top undergraduate programs of interest for students from South Africa and Mauritius?
So speaking to students at fairs, I guess they would be the typical ones that you would hear from students anywhere in the world, I would think. Those that haven't done their research will ask me about medical programs and law programs, when they're 16 years old. And I have to explain to them that those are advanced degrees. In Canada, you require an undergraduate degree first. That usually comes as a bit of a shock and a disappointment. but there's an increasing number, I'd say, of interest in engineering programs, things like architecture. I don't know why architecture is so popular here. For those that have done their homework, I would say it's more of the vocational programs. So things like hospitality or digital technologies, that type of more sophisticated, more forward-thinking view rather than the traditional medicine, law, dentistry, that sort of thing.
Great, thank you. I did just have one quick question come in, so I'll address just in case anyone is concerned that Keith has generously agreed to share the slide deck from this presentation. So I will send out, you'll receive an email from BCCIE within a few days with a link to this, the video on our YouTube channel and the slide deck. So thank you for asking that. Now, Keith, I was wondering if you would also be able to speak to opportunities for graduate programs. There was a question concerning both academic, sort of at a master's and PhD level, and also applied, so postgrad diplomas, degrees for students from South Africa and Mauritius.
So the question is in terms of the interest in graduate level students going to Canada?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't get as many questions about it, but I should say that the applications that do come in from students wanting to go and study at the graduate level in Canada are very strong. There's exceptional students from South Africa that are looking for opportunities abroad, and I'm trying to convince them to look at Canada. So those of your audience who are interested in recruiting those students would be very well advised to consider them strongly. I should mention, and I neglected to mention this in the presentation, that I'm working with MyTax to develop a co-funded student researcher mobility agreement with a South African entity here called the National Research Foundation. So this would be under the auspices of the Global Link Research Program, Global Link Researcher Program, and the Accelerate International. I think those two programs. So this is not a signed MOU yet. We're expecting it to happen this month. But if we can get that off the ground, then there would actually be some funding available to get some South African students into Canada and vice versa. So this would actually be a vehicle to get graduate researchers exchanged.
Great, thank you. This is great. Good questions coming in. Are South Africa's polytechnics strong competition for Canada's diploma programs?
Okay, so in my explanation of that fees must fall movement, the thing that's getting squeezed the most is the TVETs here in South Africa. Enrollment is very high, the quality of education is not very high, and employment, I think, after graduation is still under 50%. So if the question is, are they competition for Canada? Absolutely not. I mean, they can't hold a candle to what Canada can offer. That said, also as an effect of that fees must fall movement, the education is accessible to South Africans. So those that have the bandwidth to take those years of their life to go to school and don't need to be contributing financially to their family, for instance, that is typically their only access to vocational training. If those same students had the opportunity to go to Canada, they would take it, obviously. The trick is, or the trouble or the barrier to get over is the cost. So they certainly don't have the funds to pay for it, and which is why I mentioned that the avenue to getting access to that very eager segment of the market to go to Canada is with private sector participation.
Just to jump really quickly back to what you mentioned about the potential upcoming MIDAX sort of opportunity.
Yes.
Had a question whether people might be able to expect any information about that forthcoming.
So it's not public yet. As I say, the MOU isn't signed. And I mean, there's drafts going back and forth. I think they're at each of their legal stages. It's been on the books for a few months because really they're just looking for an opportunity to announce. You know, they want some event that the prime minister is going to be at to be able to be very visible. But they're at the very late stages of agreeing to what it's going to look like. I think it's going to be sort of low numbers. I think they were talking about 20 or so in its first year, and then ramping up to sort of 30, 40, 50 in years later. And that's in numbers of students going, I think, in totality in both directions. I already know of lots of lots of interest from South Africa. I mean, UCT, the University of Stellenbosch, Wits here, they are looking for exactly this type of vehicle to send their students to Canada. They already have partners in Canada at Queen's, at SFU, at UBC. So, but the more interest we can generate in this, and the more applications we have from both sides, of course, the more quickly we can ramp it up into something that's very concrete, and that I can then celebrate as an excellent vehicle for a student exchange, that, you know, Canada works well with South Africa.
And so while this is unlikely to be at a stage that is ready to communicate in your newsletter, how would people sort of keep tabs on those upcoming announcements?
So unfortunately, it's the kind of thing that I can't announce in writing until it's announced.
Yeah. Any suggestions on how people can keep an eye on upcoming information?
Specifically with respect to MyTax, I mean, you're very welcome to write to MyTax. I'm in communication with their international team. I imagine most of the audience would know how to contact the international team at MyTax, and that might actually work in my benefit as well. If you want to, you know, knock on their door to say, hey, when is this thing with South Africa that I heard about through the grapevine? When is that coming to pass? That might actually help them to hurry it up too.
Great. Is there potential for digital skills programs being taught online?
Yes, digital skills programs taught online. Yes, there is. I would think that you know what? I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure, and I don't want to speak out of turn. It's the kind of thing that we are investigating. We have actually in our office here a new digital industries trade commissioner, and he's been very good at contacting CIOs of various organizations here to determine what type of digital skills development companies need, and what level of interest there is among educational institutions. So that it's something we're working on. There's kind of a few elements. So there's appetite in South Africa to build that type of training capacity that could potentially benefit from assistance from Canada. So should Canadian institutions want to advise South African institutions on how to teach it, there might be appetite for that. Whether or not there would be appetite for South African students to attend classes virtually on that, honestly, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure actually about the opportunity for enrollment, given study permit restrictions, for instance. So whether they would or wouldn't need a study permit to attend those classes virtually, I'm not sure.
That's great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Now, Keith, you touched briefly on private-public partnerships as a means of connecting Canadian colleges to South African students looking for skills-based training.
Mhm.
Is there any way you could elaborate on this?
Okay. This is like the brass ring in terms of educational success story. So the one that we use all the time is that one that I mentioned, where Laurentian University got funding from Ivanhoe, and then follow-on funding from IDRC and from the Queen Elizabeth II Jubilee Scholarship Program, I think it was called, and it ended up being just over $1 million, I think, to both help the University of Limpopo build a Department of Geology. So the province of Limpopo is where a lot of South Africa's platinum happens to be found, and South Africa produces 80% of the world's platinum. So and the Ivanhoe interest in its mine in the province of Limpopo is a platinum mine. It's not actually in production yet. But when they were looking for technical expertise to be able to hire locally, they found that there was no local expertise because the local university didn't have a Department of Geology, which is why they built it. And they've also spent some of that money in sending students from the University of Limpopo to Laurentian. I think it's about 30 so far, and the program is about to be sunset. That said, there are companies like Canadian Solar, for instance, is a large company. They have an office in Cape Town from which they work to install solar panels on largely on commercial industrial installations. They tell me that they have a real problem finding trained solar panel installers, and they've asked me for help to find a Canadian institution that is willing to train people in South Africa to become solar panel installers. That said, and I'll pause there, because if there are any of your audience that are willing to come to the table with programs for exactly that, then I have what could potentially be a source of funds for you to either receive South African students into your campuses, or for you to come to South Africa and build a training institute in South Africa with Canadian Solar funding. Now, that was, mind you, was from a conversation, so I don't have that in writing from the company, but I'm sure if we put together a proposal, there, that's a possibility. And that's the type of I guess template that I had in mind. So another big company here is McCain Foods. So they have a large production facility with a couple of hundred people that supports employment for thousands in the local community. They produce I think 90% of South Africa's French fries. They've got the contract with McDonald's. They're the one known name in frozen vegetables, and it's a company from New Brunswick. But if they can come to the table with money for training farmers in the latest ag technology, for instance, with help from a Canadian vocational college, I think that's the kind of like three-way partnership that can fly. It's also some of the hardest partnerships to build, because it requires champions from all three organizations rather than just bilaterally. But I'm very open to ideas and suggestions, and for you to find partners to bring to the table so that I can come with a combined offer. But if you'd like to discuss any type of out of the box thinking, I'm very, very eager to hear.
That's great. Thanks, Keith. We have a question from Aaron Schneer. With so much of the wealth tied up in such a small amount of the population in South Africa, is there opportunity for Canadian offshore schools in South Africa specifically?
Yes, there is. I actually know of a potential investor that wants to build a Canadian branded business school here in South Africa. We haven't actually been able to find a Canadian school interested in setting up a campus in South Africa. So if there is interest, I already have an investor that I could put you in touch with. Part of the problem is that the schools from the UK and the US, so the Lancasters here, Exeter, Australia had Monash. They've met with only mixed success. So Monash, for instance, is closing, and they've sold to a South African entity. I don't think the Lancasters and the Exeters of the world are actually making money at what they do here. So I'm reluctant to try to push that idea onto my Canadian constituents, only because I'm not sure if it's all that sound in terms of a business model. There are a lot of private colleges here that provide various levels of quality education, I guess I can put it like that. So it's already a very thick market. But if there is interest from Canadian clients to open up a campus here, we can work with that.
Just wondering if you could elaborate on offshore school opportunities, be that K-12 or post-secondary offshore schools.
So the only bite I've had is in business school. That was where the investor, this is the fellow who owns CNBC and Forbes in Africa. And his kids went to York, actually, and they studied business there. So just wants to maintain that connection to Canada. So we reached out to a couple of business schools to see if they would be interested, and we didn't get any positive responses. So I would think that, as I say, there's lots of private colleges. So colleges might have some interest here. Business schools, I mean, it's a much smaller segment of the market, but they got tons of money. So, I mean, Canadian quality business education might just be able to pay it, might be able to fly, especially if the tuition fees are similar to what they are in Canada.
Okay. So a question just about COVID-19. So in light of COVID-19, how prepared are South African students to study online if the pandemic continues to affect education beyond fall 2021?
So we just actually had a call with my headquarters about our plans to have an initiative promoting Canadian education technology just an hour ago. And I had on the line my digital industries colleague here. And he answered that question. And so I'll try to just repeat what he said. um, uh, the Department of Basic Education here, which oversees about 12 million learners and oversees 450,000 teachers, we've been pushing the idea with them to take on Canadian education technology. And they've been reluctant because their budget isn't, it just doesn't cover what is required for digital learning. And yet they have that mandate. So they're satisfying that mandate through freeware, which we find astounding. Like actually moving all 12 million learners onto a virtual environment, which is where they actually are right now. The schools haven't opened. The opening of this semester has been delayed in favor of a virtual environment. And that chief director at the Department of Basic Education has been under all kinds of fire on the radio because students are not equipped. We expect that freeware is going to fail, and we're nurturing that relationship with exactly those people at the Department of Basic Education, because we're hoping that at one point they're going to crack and they're going to realize that no, we actually do need to invest in this. We actually need to buy the technology, and hopefully they'll remember that they've been talking to Canada and come to us to say, hey, we need this tomorrow. And then we'll be able to put the technology in front of them. The other problem with technology in the face of the pandemic and post-pandemic is corruption. And corruption here in South Africa is rife. I mean, it's a problem across, well, I was going to say across Africa, really, it's a problem across the world. There was an incident in one of the provinces here where the province received an enormous amount of money to buy tablets for their students, and lo and behold, I think about 10% of the money was actually used to spend on buying tablets. And those responsible are under an enormous amount of criticism now that it's become public. Same thing has happened with the procurement of PPE. I mean, yeah, the amount of corruption here is significant.
Thank you for that. I just had one follow-up question come in, a follow-up to the question about public-private partnerships. And I wonder if you would be able to speak to what sectors would be most open to this type of partnership other than mining. Can you speak to any other sectors?
Okay. That's too bad that mining's already off the table, because that's a big one. That's fine. Agriculture would be certainly one that would have an audience here, and I know we have significant expertise in Canada, and there are actually Canadian agricultural firms that might be your partners here. So two of them, one is McCain Foods, and the other is AGT. So they're an enormous supplier of pulses here on the continent and worldwide. Other sectors, so clean technologies, things like I mentioned, solar panel installation, things like water reclamation plants and water technologies, that sort of thing. So environmental assessments. We do have large EPCs that are here in South Africa. So Hatch is here, WSP is here, and SNC-Lavalin has a presence as well. Golder Associates. So these are all the engineering firms that advise on the building of these massive infrastructure projects. They're constantly doing environmental impact assessments, and they need technicians, not to mention engineers, but in terms of the vocational partnerships that could be built. ICT, there's an enormous demand for programmers. I think South Africa is satisfying about 10% of the demand that it has for ICT skilled technicians. The trouble with that is that I'm not really sure of who the buyer could be. The big telecoms tend to want to work with local TVETs and local training institutions. But again, if there can be some sort of a out-of-the-box program that we can come up with, I'm all ears. In terms of other sectors, that's all that I can think about off the top of my head.
Great. I just had one last one. You referenced or you mentioned a few potential opportunities for people coming and working within South Africa? And just a quick question about the safety of working in South Africa.
Yeah, it's not safe here. No. This is one of the most violent places in the world. The big cities are have the highest incidence of violent crime anywhere in the world. That said, because it's still a hub for the country, for the continent, a place like Johannesburg has infrastructure around it to keep visitors safe. So, for instance, I mean, my living situation and my personal situation is very, very well protected, and any stakeholders that are coming in from Canada, once the time returns to visit, should take precautions. Absolutely. But I mean, I don't think anyone in your audience is going to be unfamiliar with that. I mean, it would be the same case in a lot of places in Asia, the Middle East, anywhere else in Africa, even in some places in the States, let's be frank. So, if you're coming for a visit, we can provide you with guidance on a security briefing if you're coming as part of a group, or even if you're just coming personally. I don't mind providing you with a security briefing. If you're coming for a long duration, for a couple of weeks or even months, then there are all kinds of facilities that you can look into before you arrive to make sure that your personal security is managed.
All right. And it looks like we have just one last question or a comment in here, just regarding the importance of acknowledging and fully understanding the complex minefield that is race relations that an institution or one would have to navigate in this complex market.
Okay, I don't mind speaking to it. I'm a little bit reluctant to speak openly about this in a first meeting with a Canadian audience because race is seen as something far more openly discussed in South Africa than we're comfortable with, frankly, in Canada. Every meeting I've had with any educational stakeholder will tell me what their racial demographics of students is. I mean, the University of Western Cape, when I went to meet with them, said that they are historically a colored university, and by colored they don't mean black or white; they mean the mix. They tell me that they actually lost most of their faculty at the end of apartheid because a lot of their instructors became members of government. UCT is typically a white English-speaking university. University of Stellenbosch is typically a white Afrikaans-speaking university. So each of these institutions tends to have a racial demographic that they own. That it's not a conversation that I tend to raise with a Canadian audience because I mean, I'm not in the business of matching racial profile to racial profile. I'm happy to have any Canadian institution work with any racial community in South Africa. I'm not sure if that's answering the question directly, but absolutely, the conversation around race in South Africa is very open. It's very top of mind. There is a system, as a matter of fact, that I didn't mention in my presentation of what is essentially South Africa's version of local content, which is Black economic empowerment. So this is a very public, very openly discussed initiative policy of the South African government to empower the Black community in order to have it be included in the economy in a way that it hasn't been included historically. And that in the mining sector, for instance, that has extensive implications. Companies need to have a certain percentage of Black ownership, a certain percentage of R&D delivered to Black research, a certain percentage of management that's Black, very racially defined. Yeah, so this is a very present conversation in South Africa.
All right. Well, thank you so much for addressing that. All right. Thanks so much, Keith, for that marathon Q&A
No,
section.
I'm on my second glass of water.
Excellent. I was not that smart. That is all the time we have for our webinar this morning. I would really like to thank Keith for joining us today and for providing us with insight into the markets in South Africa and Mauritius. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And to our attendees, we would love to hear from you how you thought today's webinar went. Your feedback helps to shape future webinars. And for further information on upcoming webinars, please visit our website. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us this morning. Have a great day. Keith, have a great evening.
Thanks. And thanks to everyone.